Alright, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make an exploding floor plate. A floor plate that just takes up off out of the ground for whatever reason, as long as it is triggered. It could be a player walks into an area and an imp is under the ground and you want the floor plate to fly up out of the ground and then the imp to come up. I'm going to show you how to do that. What I've done was I loaded my test map right here, which is a simple room with a player spawn point and a light. That's all I need for testing. And then I'm going to go ahead and start drawing out my plate, the plate that's going to be flying up out of the ground. I've already preloaded some textures here. This is just something from the base floor. It is a grate looking texture, so I'm going to draw out a grate over here, give it the approximate dimensions of whatever could be in the floor that's going to be flying up. That should be good. Now I want to turn this into a movable base. That'll allow me to manipulate it and make it fly up out of the ground. So I'll slide down to movable. I right click the screen. I got movable, movable base. Now I can set some of the finer details here. I went over to my entity editor, hit the N on the keyboard, or I can click the tab down here. And I want to set the velocity. I want to set the way it springs up out of the ground. And there's two specific keys that we want to work with here. It's the init velocity and the init a velocity. What that is the initial velocity, as shown here, or the initial angular velocity. Now, let me go into more detail as I put this in. The init underscore velocity will be the amount of, is really the distance that it's going to be flying. So that determines its speed. So if I say it's going to move 0 degrees in the x, the 0 units in the x, 0 units in the y, and say 500 units in the z, which is straight up, then that thing is going to take off and try to make that 500 units. 0, 0, 500 would be my value there. That's because I don't need it to go in the X or Y. And the reason I know it's the Z is because straight up is my Z window over here. Or when I'm looking in this upper left-hand corner, it says XY, which is my top view, which means I'm looking down the Z axis. So there we go. The init velocity should be 0 space 0 space 500. Now the angular velocity is a bit different. It's the way that the plate is flies on like an angle. Instead of the plate flying straight up, it has a slight angle to it as if it was pushed up from one of the sides or one of the corners instead. And now this value I'm just taking from one of the other single player games. Actually they used minus 50, 0, 0. And you can play around with the numbers and see what you get. And I'm going to use, for my init underscore a velocity, I'm going to use 20, 0, 0. The next thing we want to set is no drop. So your key is no drop, and the value is 1 to turn it on. Now what that means is that the plate won't fall. It won't just drop to the ground. We don't want it to drop. We want it to stay right where it is until we trigger it. The next thing we want to set is not pushable. And turn that to 1 so that it is not pushable. That means that whenever the player walks up to it, he can't push it around like a cardboard box on the floor. It's a grate. It needs to stay right where it is until we trigger it and set it off. Now another thing that I found, another key value that I found in the single player game is the sound bounce. The sound that it makes whenever it bounces on the floor. And I just took this from the single player game because it really sounds pretty good. And the key here is SND underscore bounce. And the value I'm going to use is small panel underscore impact. And I spelled it wrong. We want 2 L's in this word small, right? There we go. And that's pretty much all we need to know. We need to write down this name, so we can either rename it to something that's easier to spell, or just write down movable base 4, because we're going to target it later, and we need to know what the name of it is that we're targeting. Or actually, you know what? I can also show you a shortcut that does the exact same thing. So let's get to this. First I'm going to hit escape, because now I'm ready to make my trigger. And I want to go over my textures, and I want to select, let's see, from the media, I'll go to textures. I want to go up to my common textures, and I want to select the texture for a trigger once. So we'll go over to common, we'll go down to trigger once, because the player only needs to trigger this at one time in the game. So I'm going to draw out my trigger. change my windows down here. There we go. Put it in a place that the player will definitely activate it when he walks through it. And I'm going to turn that, I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to turn that into a trigger once. Right down here. There we go. Now we've got an entity, trigger once. When a player walks into it, it's going to trigger the plate to fly off. But first, let's target it. We want to give the trigger once a target of the name of this base plate, which is movable base 2. Or the shortcut that I told you I was going to show you is if you have everything deselected, you first select your trigger, then you select the item you want to trigger, hold down the control key, hit K, and it automatically triggers it for you. There have been a couple incidences where I've seen this mess up, so if you've got a complicated entity, I suggest you go in and you manually type in the values, because nothing's worse than getting an unexpected, something unexpected happening. That's it. That is that's all we need to do. So I'm going to save this map. I'm going to file, to save as, and I'll call this base plate, I guess. And I am going to BSP it. Now let's open it up in the game. Hit the F2 key, bring down the editor. I want a dev map, game, it's in the MP, and it is called base plate, I think I called it. Yes, I did. Here we go. Let's see if it works. Okay, there's the plate. Now let's walk into our trigger. Boom. It flies up into the air. Now it tried to do 500 units, which wasn't crazy. It was just enough to make it jump. Maybe you want to try 1,000 units, and that thing will fly. And there's all kinds of other settings you can play around with, but I just wanted to show you how to get that base plate to go. And one other thing. You notice how it fell almost right back in the same position? That's partly because of how far we made it go. But it's also because we didn't set any of the other values. You know what? Before I end this tutorial, let's try a little experimentation here, and I'm going to show you some of the other things it can do. I'm going to change this velocity. I'm going to make this thing fly up into the air really far, 1024 units. But what else I'm going to do is I'm going to change the angle. It's the X or Y, it doesn't matter. It's going to move away from where it is right now, and I'm going to set that to like 50. There we go. So now it's not going to just go straight up. It's going to go up on a little bit of a angle there, and it'll look a little different. It'll look a little better probably. I think it flopped around well enough whenever it went into the air. I could change its value. I think I'll change it to 50. And okay, let's save it. Let's compile it, and let's test it. Alright, here we go. Trigger. See it fly, see it take off and bounce around a whole bunch. And that's what you get. Alright, there we go. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you find it useful, and happy mapping.